This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 245 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I hope you can hear me well. It's really blowy and stormy here in Perth, but it's been like this for several days, so I've given up waiting for a quieter moment. So I think you'll hear me well enough, but it's very cosy tucked up in my semi-soundproof office here with the wind howling outside and occasional thunder. But anyway, that's winter down here. In episode 245, we are talking about what the meaning of thoughtful travel is. So it's probably something we should have addressed sooner, rather than waiting 245 episodes to discuss the actual meaning of this podcast's name. But it's okay. I think, it's better late than never. So episode 245 is, what does thoughtful travel mean? So, to be honest, back in early 2016, when I was just planning to start this podcast, so I knew I wanted it to be about why travel is important, what it can teach us, and how, I guess, if we're more thoughtful about our travel, we get more benefits from it and can do more good as well. But if I'm honest, that's about as far as my definition went back then. It just seemed like the kind of stuff I wanted to talk about, but it had nowhere near a kind of fully formed definition of what I thought thoughtful travel was. But I'm very pleased to say that both my ideas about what thoughtful travel can be have expanded immensely, and more people seem to be thinking about travelling thoughtfully and talking about being thoughtful travellers. So both my thoughts and the world's thoughts have progressed significantly in those 5.5 years or so. It's pretty exciting, actually. So I thought that it was time for this episode. So I've actually put together some shorter answers than usual in answer to this question, what does thoughtful travel mean, from a bunch of guests who have given me their definitions in the last couple of months. And I also asked the wonderful Thoughtful Travellers group on Facebook, and I have some answers from people there as well, which I will share. Speaking of groups, I've actually just started another one on LinkedIn for those of you who prefer that platform to Facebook, and you will be able to find it by going to notaballerina.com/LinkedIn, and I'll add a link to the show notes as well. We'll be discussing different topics in the Thoughtful Travellers LinkedIn group, so feel free to be in both. They'll be both great. Anyway, back to what does thoughtful travel mean, and my first guest today is Henry Gold, who has done a lot of very different and very fascinating kinds of travel and work around the world, and had a really thoughtful answer to this question.
To me, thoughtful travel means continuously be thoughtful of people and nature and environment. Just be respectful. If what you see, what you do, how you do it, who you meet, how you talk. I worked overseas and I travel overseas, and I often would find young people and even older people, hard-headed, who would say, well, that's my way of life, I'm not going to modify myself, I'm not going to put a hat on, I'm not going to take off the shoes, I'm not going to say. And I always have a hard time with this kind of behavior. I talk to people, I explain to them, you're in their homes, in their houses, respect, when I come to your home, I respect your, the chair sits here, not there, where I would prefer to be there, but here it says.
That's such a good example. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So just be respectful, often with young women in many of these places, when they're asked, cover yourself, and they say, well, I'm a free woman, independent, I don't have to do this. Well, it doesn't work that way,
Yeah, then you shouldn't come here.
To me, thoughtful travel is exactly that. Respect where you are, who you meet, how you behave, what you say, what you do. You didn't come here all this way to play yourself, to impose yourself in what you think and what you know and what you see. If that's what you're doing, then I have no patience for that. And of course the other part that goes with it, thoughtful travel to me is why am I here? Meaning, did I come to learn something? Did I come to experience something? Did I come to exploit this place? Did I come to get rich? Did I come simply to lie on the sand? Whatever. But to me, thoughtful travel is I'm coming to a place. I want to learn as much as possible about it. I want to think about it. I want to see how it impacts me, impacts my life, how it improves my life in many ways. Because the more knowledge I know, the more experience I have, the richer I am. Mm-hmm. So to me, thoughtful again is learn, ask questions, interact with people. You there. Greatest opportunity in the world if you're lucky enough to be able to go there and afford it and be there for whatever reason. Don't waste it. So as I said, to me, thoughtful travel is when I travel, for example, I always carry a book from that area by someone who wrote that area. I read about that place. I don't often read about the places before I go. I do some, but because I'm always motivated to do it, but I don't because I'm busy and I have other things, and I run a company and it's always something to do. So you often begin to read about it on the plane there.
Yeah, I'm the same, exactly.
But as I said, to me, whether it's reading a book written by someone from there, or describing the area, or whether it's eating local food all the time, I never ever go to a Western restaurant when I'm when I'm traveling. Mm-hmm. I want to find a local place. I prefer family-owned places. I don't go to chains, because, I don't go to chains in the hotels, not restaurants. I didn't come here all the way to visit what I already know.
Absolutely.
I came here to taste and visit and experience something I don't know. And that often will challenge me. That will often confuse me, eradicate, if you will, all my original ideas about the place. I thought I know something about this place. I know nothing about it. And it's good because that's why I came. I came there to be exactly shown, hey, Henry, you're wrong.
Yeah. I love that. Learning you're wrong can be all that you need to be a thoughtful traveller sometimes. And Henry had so many other really good points to make there, all of which I actually really, really agree with. Now, my next guest, I've just got a really short snippet from him because I have a full interview with him next week for you, and it's James Mwenda. So James now runs an expedition company in Kenya, but for a decade he was actually looking after the caretaker for the last northern white rhinos in the world in Kenya. And I have an amazing interview to hear more about his thoughts about travel next week, but I've just got this short extract which was how he described his definition of thoughtful travel as well.
What I think thoughtful travel is basically the basic ideal of traveling and exploring the world. But as times are going and as we're moving on forward, it is really great to put a lot of thought into traveling because times have changed, circumstances have changed. We've really seen now sometimes travel can be so great for conservation and for areas that people choose to visit, and how at times it can be worse to the areas that people visit. Mm-hmm. So the ideal of putting thoughtful travel, what it means to me is to really be cautious of why am I traveling? Where am I traveling? What is the impact when I travel? Is it going to be positive? Is it going to be negative? What are ways that I can even improve the areas that I choose to visit? How can I make even the places that I choose to visit even better? So to me, thoughtful travel is all about putting your mind and a little bit thought into anywhere you choose to travel. And in this case, to me, are trying to make sure that when we travel, we are able to leave a positive impact.
This idea that James mentions of leaving a positive impact is kind of indicative of lots of current thinking at the moment. We seem to be moving from sustainable travel, where we just want to do no harm, to something more akin to regenerative travel, where we want to do good or leave a place better than we found it. So I think that's, kind of a new way of thinking of thoughtful travel as well. Now, my next guest is Helena Fox, and Helena had lots of great parts to her definition of thoughtful travel and some examples of how to be an unthoughtful traveller as well.
The most important thing when you're traveling is to go and really be present. in the place that you go to, and properly absorb it. Spend enough time that you actually visiting it as a place and as somebody's home and as a place of community and culture and deep history, and not just as a place to photograph and then tick off. And certainly taking photographs matters, and it's one of the ways that I preserve my memories. But I have, in fact, there was one very memorable time when I was at the Trevi Fountain in Rome, and I saw this couple arrive at the Trevi Fountain, take a photo of the Trevi Fountain, pull out a map, tick off the Trevi Fountain and leave. And I remember, and that was when I was living in Rome, and I was sitting there just people watching and loving the space, and there's just so much to take in, and it was such a vibrant city. And I remember just thinking, oh, they've so missed out. Like that's one of the things when you have rushed travel. I think it can be harder to be a thoughtful traveler if you're rushed and if you're just ticking off a lot of things on your itinerary. So that to me is very important, to really get to know a place and not just be a, stop and go visitor. And I think it's also important to be respectful of languages and to take the time to work on your communication with the people who live there, because you can't just insist or expect that someone knows your language. And also it's important to know that not everything will be the same as where you've come from. No assumptions. Basically avoid your assumptions, leave them at home, and be really open to what's there in the place that you're visiting. And my second thought that came to mind with the thoughtful travel is I think we're moving towards a great need for sustainable travel, traveling in a way that protects the environment, moves towards not hurting the environment, really thinking about modes of travel, thinking about waste when we travel, just being really sensitive to the environment and thoughtful about sustainability as much as you can be.
Yeah. And I think COVID really showed us that too, that, in the early days of COVID, those, the images of nature regenerating kind of without all the people there, that was a really, we kind of know that we're doing all this harm, but when you saw those images, I think that was very, very telling for a lot of people.
Yeah, and as much as we want to see all the places, maybe the world doesn't need so many people going to these sensitive areas, and it's one of those things of travel. We think, oh, we can and should go everywhere, and then you think, well, okay, what if I was to think about it from the planet's perspective? Do they need this many people, say in Venice, but also in this wilderness? Do we need that many people? And I know that means maybe we'll deprive ourselves of some experiences, but I think we're moving towards a world where we do need to think about not always just having our wants at the center, thinking about how to really, and that's where, sharing communities can be really helpful. Like I love those websites where it's like, click on this and you'll see out somebody's window in, Slovenia or something, and it's like, that's so cool to me, the idea that we can experience each other's worlds in a way that might, we might not have to physically be there all the time. So it's interesting. As someone who loves traveling, I'm aware now that it has such a massive impact. So
yeah, and I don't necessarily think we're depriving ourselves. For example, if instead we choose to travel less frequently and to stay in a place longer, then we circle back to what you said initially, like that image of the people at the Trevi Fountain literally ticking it off and rushing off to their next ticker box thing. Yeah. I mean, it's horrifying. I mean, I know lots of people travel that way, but it's horrifying and what the perfect example. And if we choose to travel more slowly and only, and spend, 3 months in Rome or Italy, every few years rather than lots of quick trips everywhere, then we kind of can do both. We can get more out of that travel and we can be kinder to the environment. So.
Yeah, I think so.
I love all of Helena's thoughts on thoughtful travel, and especially there's some good examples there about the extreme bucket list ticking kind of tourists, which are what gives bucket lists a really bad name and makes me feel a bit icky about them, to be honest. So, but lots and lots of food for thought there. Now, my final guest, before I start mentioning some of the great thoughts from the Thoughtful Travellers group members as well, is Vince Dickson, and he also had Lots of great stuff to say about what thoughtful travel means.
From my point of view, I think it's probably partly linked to what we've just talked about, in the sense of actually being a little more open to the places you go to and kind of the experiences that you have there. I mean, I know when I was traveling when I was younger, there was a sort of, in that whole backpacking world, there's always a sort of cliche of being the sort of traveler, not the tourist, which I think that whole thing became almost an industry on its own, which almost countered what the whole purpose was. But it was the idea of not sort of running through a place and ticking off sites, because there's a whole bunch of other criteria in terms of sort of environmental issues with travel, and just, I think, the impact of tourism on areas and kind of financial impacts, and maybe who sees the end result of the income and the kind of benefits of tourism. But I suppose the base level for me, that is still tied into the idea of actually just being more thoughtful about where you're traveling and the people that live there, and what it's about. I don't know if you've read, this is a slight tangent, but
I love tangents.
I don't know if you read the book Sapiens. It's a book by Novo. Well, I'm going to butcher his name. Harari is his surname. Anyway, he wrote a book called Sapiens, and Homo Deus was the follow-up to that. And Sapiens was basically takes you through sort of the history of humans, like and all the major things that formed us as a species, from sort of when we were way back in the day all the way through to agriculture and how the stuff shaped us. And it was one thing that really stood out for me in that book, is that for most of human history, traveling to another place was not a thing you did socially. There wasn't this idea. It was very much staying in your area. There was no, if you told someone that I'm just going across sort of the ocean to go see what's there and experience some other stuff, it was a very dangerous, crazy thing to do. Like, why would you ever do that? And I just realized that actually the whole idea of travel, there's this real sort of nobility to travel, I suppose. It's something to be proud of, and people kind of use it as a badge of honor of how well traveled they are. But it's actually a very recent human thing, this idea of kind of wanderlust and seeing other places and actually spending your time getting these experiences. And for humans, for most of our time we've been around, it was sort of, travel was by necessity, or I suppose greed in many cases, or trade, or the sort of tourism is actually fairly new.
That's true. On the history of humankind, it's actually like this tiny, tiny blip, really, isn't it? I never really thought of it like that.
Yeah, it's a very modern thing, actually. The sort of, and especially, I mean, now at the volume it happens, it's just obviously a whole different thing. And I suppose going back to your question of thoughtful travel, I suppose it integrates there in the idea of like, why are you actually doing it in the first place? Of like, why are you actually going to another place? Is it to get away from where you are, or is it an experience, or is it really just to sort of tick off the sites and tell your neighbors about it? And I don't know, I feel sometimes, and I visit some places, and that sort of conveyor belt tourism thing just feels like there's no thoughtfulness in it all. It is really, people come out of it more stressed than they went into it, and really have nothing to show from it apart from sort of the Instagram photos.
Yep. Instagram pictures are not enough. That does not make you a thoughtful traveller, for sure. Now, the book that Vince mentioned is Sapiens, which is by Yuval Noah Harari, and it looks amazing. I have put it on my list, and there's also a link in the show notes if you're curious as well. So in the Thoughtful Travellers group on Facebook, I got great answers from listeners there about what you think the definition of thoughtful travel is. And of course, there's no one definition. So I wanted to share some of the best ideas that we gathered there. And a lot of them overlap in different ways with some of what the guests have said today so far. But everyone's got a different angle, and I think it's so important that we can have our own personal definition of thoughtful travel, but it's also very interesting and instructive to listen to what other people think it is, I think. So a couple of brief ones first. Tim said thoughtful travel is to be respectful of your surroundings, whether that's buildings, flora, fauna, people, whatever. Respect is key. So I think that's really true. Jazz has said thoughtful travel is when there's a change in yourself, in how you see the world, yourself and the community, and you use that transformation to teach or help others and all your surroundings. So there's some of that, taking something home and even giving something back when you're there in that answer. Now, Ina in Norway went away and said she loves etymology and looking at the origins and roots of the word thoughtful. And so she came back and said what's common in her research is something about being caring and careful, and she liked it. She said it's like going into a house you don't own and being aware and careful, being quiet, patient and respectful by opening the different doors, timing your thoughts and your words to the person who owns the house. And I think that's a beautiful way if we move that analogy across to travel. I think it's a very beautiful way to approach being thoughtful when we travel. Now, Denise in Canada had another great explanation, and she said to me, thoughtful travel means being intentional and mindful about various aspects of travel. It can mean considering the environmental, cultural, economic, social or political impact of our travels. It can mean trying to take trips that have a net positive or at least neutral impact on the destination. Thoughtful travel could also mean choosing the timing, the style of travel and the destination in a way that facilitates trips that are personally meaningful, whatever that means for each of us, beyond just an escape from regular life. Completely agree with that, Denise, as well. And I think the idea of aiming for having a positive impact is something that is a way we can be really more thoughtful than most of us have ever been. I think it's been more common to be at least thinking of having a neutral impact on our destinations, but I think post-pandemic travel, I hope that post-pandemic travel there'll be more of an emphasis on trying to achieve a positive impact as well. Now, here in WA, Kath said that she also agreed with Denise a lot about the timing and said part of that is slowing down our pace, taking the time to really see and hear who and what is around us and attending to what happens when we put ourselves there too. And Kath also went on to say it's imperfect because all travel has impact. And she says, I think the German Greens came up with the slogan, "You are not in a traffic jam, you are the traffic jam." Sounds right. So it's accepting that to some extent, I would say, and ameliorating the consequences of our presence and treading lightly. And that's also true. And I think there's lots of different ways that we can go beyond that to try and leave a positive impact. And the last answer was from Michael, who's currently living in Turkey. And he had a really useful way to look at it. So I think that all of us can find a way we can have a positive impact. And in his case, it was quite specific. So I'll just share what he said. And he said, thoughtful travel for he and his partner as a gay couple includes something very specific. So he said, as relatively well-off white Westerners, we are afforded a huge amount of privilege. And even in much more homophobic countries like Turkey, where they're living at the moment, I think for a few months, local mores don't apply to us because of what we call the weird foreigner rule. In a nutshell, the weird foreigner rule means that the local rules don't apply within reason because they're outsiders who dress and act weird and they're spending money there, so the locals don't care so much if we're gay or wearing Hawaiian colourful shirts. So the thoughtful part, Michael went on to say, is for us that wherever they live, they usually stay in a destination from 1 to 3 months. He said, we try to get to know the local LGBTQI community and use our limited platform to help them in ways that they see fit. So that can translate to speaking to LGBTQI groups about our experiences in the gay rights movement and as a long-term gay couple, writing articles, doing Instagram live chats about the situation in different places, helping with fundraising. And he finished by saying, here in Istanbul, it meant turning out for the banned Pride March and getting tear-gassed along with everyone else. So I think is a fabulous example of how everyone has a different way that they can make a positive impact when they travel, and thinking about it ahead of time can make a huge difference. So thanks for that answer, Michael. I really appreciate that one. And all of you, thank you for your really, really thoughtful answers. It was wonderful to read them and to see everyone's different thoughts about how to be a thoughtful traveller. So thank you so much for listening to episode 245. I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to my guests. So first of all, I chatted with Henry Gold. He's the founder of the Tour d'Afrique and founder of TDA Cycling. So you can find more about his company at tdaglobalcycling.com. Then I chatted with James Mwenda of Gemo Expeditions, and you can find more about him at gemoexpeditions.com, and stay tuned for next week's deep dive episode with him. It was one of the best interviews I've ever had. It was such a privilege, and just so many great stories from him. Next, I chatted with Helena Fox, and Helena's a writer. I have just finished her amazing novel, How It Feels to Float. Highly recommended, and you can find out more about Helena at helenafoxauthor.com. And our final guest was Vince Dickson from Hunu. They make sustainable travel products, and you can find out more about them at wearehunu.com. Hunu is HUNU. In the show notes, I'll also leave a link to that book that Vince mentioned, Sapiens. Of course, there's also links to the Facebook group for Thoughtful Travellers, or just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, and a link to our Thoughtful Travellers group in LinkedIn as well. And all of this information will be in the show notes. And for this episode, you can find the show notes at notaballerina.com/245. As always, and especially because it's such an important topic, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.